G'day YouTube, Warble's on a lot here with the conclusion of the Mindfield and then a Warble rant.
Things that really matter in terms of civic culture, in terms of the mechanisms of democratic functioning and democratic debate. And I think it's a massive cost. Wow. It's a huge cost. I'm not going to let you reply because we have a guest to get to. You're listening to The Mindfield. You can catch the show anytime by subscribing to the podcast. You can listen live on the radio, as you may be doing right now, or you can stream us or listen on the ABC radio app. Scott, let's get to the guest.
Indeed. Our guest is a particular expert, in fact, in exactly this area. Not necessarily politics, but precisely the culture of workplace and the kind of relationships that then can and should not be cultivated in the workplace. Paula McDonald is Professor of Work and Organization at the Queensland University of Technology Business School. Hello, Paula.
Hello, good morning. Thanks for inviting me.
So, I mean, as so often when I get to this point, I'm half tempted just to say, you've heard everything that we've said, go.
But let me the umpire.
Yeah, that's right. But let me just ask you, I mean, you've heard what we've said. Do you think that the Prime Minister was justified in making the announcement that he did, in laying down the change to the Ministerial Code of Conduct? Because I would just say that I'm very pessimistic about the relevance and the efficacy of codes of conduct within vocations that have a very high sense of vocational calling, vocational identity. I would hope that a change to a code of conduct is a way of affecting cultural change. Do you think this was a good thing that he did, or are you pretty much on Waleed's side?
I am on Waleed's side, I'm afraid. I do very much agree with you that there are particular and high risks associated with workplaces where, as you said, there are unequal power, and where that unequal power is amplified, and politics is a perfect example of that. But for a range of different reasons, I think that a sex ban in the workplace or in the government or anywhere else for that matter is basically completely impractical. I mean, workplaces and governments employ human beings, and at its most superficial level, we know that people have met their future spouses for forever, really. But I also, I go along with Waleed in terms of public-private boundaries, and this is where I've done quite a lot of work. And, you know, I've studied workplace dynamics and workplace behaviour for a long time. And I think what we've really seen in recent years is an extension of employer and management reach into people's private lives. So, for example, we now see CCTV in workplaces. We see people wearing wearable technologies that's measuring their performance in real time. We've got wellness programs where employers are collecting biographical information about people. We've seen the monitoring of emails and so on, social media. And I really think that we need to be very careful with how not has, you know, the extent of that, the reach of employers into our private lives, as if we don't have enough privacy issues with big data and public surveillance.
So, Scott, where would you erect a privacy barrier?
Where would I erect a privacy barrier in general?
Or even in this case, if you like. I mean, even if you're talking about public figures or politicians.
Yeah, you see, here's where I'm really interested in both of your responses to this, because I suspect I might actually be on my own in this particular part of the conversation. But I simply think that the public-private distinction works in a different way when you are in, let's just say, specific vocations. But I think politics would here be the preeminent vocation. So
I agree with that in principle, but I don't think it can be dissolved in this way.
Yeah, but you see, that's where I do not agree with that as a normative principle. I don't think I can agree with that because, I mean, firstly, I think it is important that we hive out those spaces within our common life that are, as much as they possibly can be, desexualized or non-sexual spaces. I realize that these relationships take place, but I also worry about some kind of proscriptive or normative attempt not being made to say, you have good work here to do, and that work ought to be personally fulfilling, that work ought to be collegially fulfilling, And there ought to be something about the common work in which we engage that ought to change, that ought to moderate and temper, if you like, or chasten the nature of the relationships that then grow up in that place.
Yes, but any kind of policy development has to consider carefully unintended consequences. If you try and ban sexual relationships, well, hopefully the sexual relationships aren't going on in the workplace, but they arise from the workplace and then take place in the private zone. But if you try and ban workplace relationships, either between managers and subordinates or between peers, you will send those relationships underground. And people will conduct those relationships, but in secret. And that has a whole range of negative consequences on, the workplace culture and co-workers. It obfuscates loyalties. It causes all kinds of problems. So
problems that are greater than the problems of a tacitly sexualized environment. I realize that that's a loaded term. I'm not saying a sexualized environment as in, as if sort of bawdy jokes and posters and circulation of online porn or something that's just part of the
Sure.
workplace. But I mean, if there's not an overt sense of common culture that says this is not what we do in this vocation, the problems are greater?
I think there's a middle ground, and if I could use the example of the Australian Defence Force, for example, which has openly acknowledged that relationships between personnel arise all the time, and probably in organisations like the ADF more so than other organisations, because people live and breathe and work and eat together and go on deployment and so on. So the ADF acknowledges that workplace relationships occur, but mandates that when those relationships, come to some kind of development, and that's a blurry line, that there is a declaration of those relationships, and then they have a whole range of measured responses in place to deal sensitively with those issues and ensure that the negative outcomes of, particularly where it's a subordinate-manager relationship, don't occur. Now, that's, of course, easier in larger organisations where you can shift people around a bit more easily, much more difficult in small and medium organisations. But I think mandating the declaration of relationships and then responding accordingly is a much better way to go.
Even that, I think, could be complicated, because if you don't want to declare the relationship because it's compromising, as would be the case in the Barnaby Joyce affair, you then still have the same problem being created of that non-disclosure and therefore the relationship being a matter of public interest. And the thing I'm more concerned about than anything here is the subversion and even perversion of public democratic culture. The obsession of media discourse, for example, with matters like this, while all manner of policies that have massive, sometimes rapacious effects on enormous numbers of people simply go uncategorized or unremarked upon because it's not as interesting.
But see, here's where...
I'm going to fade them out there because I want to have a little bit of a say of my own. Waleed is wrong and Barnaby's gone. And one of the reasons he's gone is because the National Party women were deserting in droves. The National Party vote in the New England electorate went from 62% to 40% as of 10 days ago. The Liberal Party were terrified that the women would desert the Liberal Party as well if the Liberal Little Boys Club continued to back up the National Party Little Boys Club, who were backing up Barnaby, the bastard's father. And if all the women desert the National Party and all the women desert the Liberal Party, they're going to go to Pauline Hanson. So Barney Baby may yet have elected Pauline Hanson as the next Prime Minister. What I'm going to do now is read from the opinion page of Thursday, February 15's Glenniness Examiner, a piece by GTW Agnew of Coopers Plains, which hit the streets on Thursday morning. And that was the day the Prime Minister stood the Deputy Prime Minister down and told him to go home and consider his position, i.e. prepare to resign. Personal freedoms. We have many freedoms in Australia, and they're usually thought of as being private matters. We have freedom of religion, for instance. We have freedom of sexual preference too. Any consenting adult may go to bed with whomever he or she likes. But if Corey Barnardi suddenly announced that he was really gay and would be marrying his male lover soon, the members of his little party wouldn't tolerate such a reversal of what Barnardi has been saying for so long. and all that would be a news story. Then there's freedom of movement and freedom to choose your job. Both of those things are up to the individual. So if Scott Morrison and Malcolm Turnbull suddenly announced that they were going to reintroduce the direction of labour which applied in Australia during World War II because it would be so much more economically efficient, there would be outrage. Millions of people would protest that such horrors were not what they thought the Liberal Party stood for, and all that would be a news story. In the National Party, however, none of this applies. The party leader himself can casually tear up and throw away everything he ever said about traditional family values and the ministerial code of conduct, while the rest of us are firmly told to butt out because it's all a private matter. Besides, the Nats leader says that he still believes in all that stuff anyway. So the National Party simply has no intention of practicing what it preaches, bracket, and hey, does it preach, close bracket. It shows us that there is no meaning in the things which it claims are its own basic principles. Those things are just empty slogans, nothing but bits of political marketing. Voters are simply customers for a series of fads which have been well talked up by professional con men. And the more, quote, moral, unquote, these fads are, the greater the con. However, credit where it's due. The leader of the National Party is a good Catholic who believes that items like condoms or the pill are just invitations to promiscuity. He also believes that using them is a sin. On these points, he has indeed practiced what he preaches. So says GTW Agnew of Coopers Plains. Well, yeah, up to a point, GTW Agnew. Barnaby Joyce has pleased the Pope by not using a condom when he was fucking his girlfriend by that stage. She was no longer his painted secretary because when he moved in with her, 6 months after his wife, at least 6 months after he started shagging her. At least 3 months after he started shagging her, it was causing problems in the office, and he transferred the painted secretary to his mate's office, Canavan. Went from $131,000 to $138,000, so she got a pay rise. The job was not advertised. And then Canavan lost his job because he was a secret Italian. So then she got shifted to Damien Drum's office, and she kept the pay rise. And then at about that point, a couple of months after the midwinter parliamentary ball in June, Barnaby's wife found out. She kicked him out. He went to his ex-painted secretary, now the girlfriend, and that's when he did the right thing by the Pope by not using his condom. But then again, he's got 4 daughters, so he was probably trying for a son, wasn't he? In the patriarchal culture of the Barney Baby Joyce variety. What sticks in the craw of everybody who voted for him, the not only conservative family values, but also the Christian, Catholic, more or less fundamentalist, moral majority family values crowd, is that if you can't stand your partner, if your marriage is breaking up, okay, ever since 1975, we've had a handle on that. What you do is you announce to your partner and your kids that you can't stand living there any longer, and you go and set up a separate address. And then once you get your kids used to shuttling backwards and forwards between mummy's place and daddy's place, then if either one of the partners feels so inclined as to set up a new partner, organise a Brady Bunch or something, they do that after the separation. There is very little tolerance for a Catholic Minister of the Crown, Deputy Prime Minister, fucking his painted secretary for 6 months before his wife finds out. There's just no tolerance for that. And Barnaby Joyce is he's the brat of the pack. He's the baby of the litter. He's never, ever been disciplined. He's always got away with whatever he wanted to do because he was Barnaby, and how could anything Barnaby, the sainted Barnaby, the apple of mummy and daddy's eye, the baby of the family, the one who didn't ever go to De La Salle College, Armidale, the blue-collar, working-class Catholic boarding school that I went to. He went to St Ignatius Riverview, where all of the barristers, Catholic barristers and lawyers and doctors in Sydney send their kids to. And he was probably the poorest kid in the class. The hillbilly hick hayseed dairy farmer's son from Danglemar, sucking up to money, and that's what he's been doing ever since. But he's never been pulled into line for being wrong, morally and ethically. He wanted to do it, so it's good on you, Barnaby. Yay, team, you go ahead and do it. Well, now he's run into the problem that if you sell yourself as a moral majority conservative family values politician, you're not allowed to fuck your painted secretary before you leave your wife. If he'd left his wife first, okay, everybody would have said, yeah, righto, that's your private life, and, it's a bit stupid and tough shit on your daughters because they're going to get their lives totally destabilised by it. But, you know, it was within the bounds. What Barnaby did was not. And if only the bastard had stayed there another week, he could have totally demolished the coalition. Senator Christensen is already calling for the National Party to pull out of the coalition because Liberal and national interests are different. If that happens, okay, we have a Labor Prime Minister next week. Warble's on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.